you this webinar from HUA about the Mahabharata and introducing the tradition and the text and clarifying for you any issues that come up. So there is a couplet which is very famous, which is not found in all Mahabharata editions, but when the critical edition was prepared, Suktankar decided to make that verse number 000. And let me begin with that. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim chaiva tatho jayam udhirayet. This is the Mangala, and in all traditional literature, there are Mangalas that begin the study of a text, and there are Palastrutis or eulogistic praises that end the study of a book, a chapter, or a section. So with that, let's go. Let me share with you the PowerPoint for this presentation. Can everyone see this slide? Is that visible, Siddhi?
Yes, I can see.
Okay. So first we need to know what the Mahabharata is. Mahabharata is everywhere, so we need to gain some insight into what we mean by when we say Mahabharata. So let me begin, rather than with the Mahabharata, let me begin in the 3rd century of our common era, where Vyasa writes very beautiful Sanskrit plays, which assume the story and the tradition of the Mahabharata as sufficiently extant and well known. So, for example, he writes these plays which all relate to the Mahabharata. For example, Urubhanga. Urubhanga is a play with maybe about 3 persons on the stage. It involves Bhima having broken Duryodhana's thighs because of the vow he took when Duryodhana molested Draupadi, a helpless woman. So this is his fate. His thighs are broken, but Vyasa presents him as a sympathetic character, someone who has regretted his actions, someone who is trapped in the heroic code of action, which would be the Kshatriya Dharma, and someone who's struggling to make sense of his life without becoming dispassionate in a bad way. The second play, Madhyama Vyayoga, has to do with a family reunion between Bhimasena, his wife Hidimba, and her son Ghatotkacha. It is a recognition play, meaning people, when Bhima arrives on the scene, Ghatotkacha does not know that Bhima is his father, and there is this sort of a reunion. In Karnabhara, Vyasa challenges the view of the Mahabharata, not in the sense of challenging it in order to critique it, but to explore more poetic and philosophical nuances in the story of Karna. It is set in during the last day of Karna before he joins the war, or the war begins the next day. He's just found out that Arjuna, whom he's sworn to kill, is indeed his enemy, is not just his enemy, but also his brother. So there is a lot of poetic tension there. Indra comes. Indra is Arjuna's father, as you know, coming to beg him for his earrings and his armor, which are magical and which would have protected him in battlefield. Balacharita is a retelling of Krishna's boyhood story. And so also Dutavakya, Dhuta Ghatotkacha, Pancharatra, these are all plays written by Vyasa. Now, is there a difference between the Mahabharata as we have it in a text and Vyasa's recreations? Do we still call Urubhanga Mahabharata, for example? That's a question I'm going to leave hanging out there, and we will need to settle that question if we are to get our teeth into the Mahabharata in a scholarly way. That was 3rd century. 4th to 5th century, Kalidasa has already read Vyasa. He compliments Vyasa on his poetic techniques. And he writes this famous play, Abhignana Shakuntalam, which is the story of Shakuntala getting a ring from Dushyanta, losing that ring, and Dushyanta forgetting who Shakuntala is. This story appears in Germany. There's a whole book on this about Shakuntala in Germany, and it becomes so popular that Goethe actually cites from Abhignana Shakuntalam in his play Faust. Then, so the tradition is not just limited to India or to just poets in the Sanskrit tradition, but it is just bleeding out in a big way. Bhattanarayana, 6th to 7th century, cites Vyasa also, and he also composes his own. Sorry, this is a mistake. This is Bhattanarayana did not. I just duplicated it. Bhattanarayana also writes a play. My mistake. That play is Veni Samhara. And in the Veni Samhara, you focus just on the battlefield and its carnage. It's a beautiful, heroic play bringing out heroic personalities. In all these hero personalities, female roles are sort of less. And so just excuse me for that typo. Anandavardhana, 8th century, writes a complete book on aesthetics called Lochana, which is also commented on by the famous philosopher, Kashmir Shaiva philosopher, Abhinavagupta, who Abhinavagupta also writes a commentary on one portion of the Mahabharata, which is the Bhagavad Gita. So a continuous tradition of poets, aestheticians, in the sense of those who specialize in writing works on poetics and aesthetics, which is the Sanskrit word for that is Alankara Shastra, and philosophers are actively deploying the Mahabharata tradition. Meanwhile, just to give you not to focus so much on the Sanskrit, I wanted to select a few South Indian versions of the Mahabharata. There is something in Andhra called, or there is a Telugu version called Andhra Mahabharatamu, written between 11th and 14th century of our era by 3 poets, Nannaya, Tikkana, and Yarapragada. And these 3 poets, for example, Nannaya is operating 11th to 12th century, Tikkana is 13th century, and Yarapragada is 14th century. So you see how over 300 years, this Andhra Mahabharata is put together. It has the Sanskrit text in front of it. But it is not a literal translation. It is not even attempting to capture verse by verse what the Sanskrit Mahabharatam has. But it doesn't mean that it is a random text just made up, because there is a great deal of fidelity not only to the plot, but to the Dharma lessons, to the philosophical tracks, and so on, that are carried over. So let's call it a poetic recreation rather than a translation. It has some beautiful innovations. For example, when Subhadra is being carried away by Arjuna, the there is a war. All the Kshatriyas who had come to the Swayamvara challenge Arjuna. At that time, Subhadra turns to Arjuna and says, "Why don't you fight and I will drive the chariot for you?" This is very significant to the Mahabharata plot, because, as you know, it is not Draupadi's sons, but it is Subhadra's grandson, who is Parikshit, who will save the Kuru line. And Subhadra is Krishna's sister, and Krishna himself will take that place as Arjuna's charioteer. So all these wonderful poetic metaphors sort of come up and are deployed, but it is quite different from the Sanskrit Mahabharata. There is a Tamil version, there is a legend. I've never been able to verify this one way or another. There's supposed to be an epic called Perundevanar, which is supposed to be the oldest Tamil Mahabharata, but it is lost, but other Tamil texts talk about it. And but the Tamil version, like the Telugu version, is a 15th century text called Mahabharatam. It is written by Sri Viliputurar, the man from Viliputur. So we know very little about these things, but this Mahabharata, which is called, which is by 15th century, is what most Tamil-speaking people follow. There are also Malayalam versions, such as the Niranam poets. Niranam is a village in Kerala. They all probably belong to the same family, Kanasa, and they wrote a book called Kanasa Bharatam and Bharatamala. The Kanasa is a family name as well. Kanasa Brahmins were very, very erudite in Sanskrit. So they're not making this up either, but they're also not just translating. They're poets in their own sense. So the two Malayalam ones are Kanasa Bharatam and Bharatamala from up till 15th century. In the 15th century, Cheruseri writes Bharatam Gatha, and in the 16th century, you have Tunchat Ezutachan, who writes Mahabharatam Kilipattu. These are all sort of poetic recreations. So I want you to see how throughout Indian history, there is a kind of a pan-Indic Mahabharata poetic tradition, which is very aware of and drawing its inspiration from what we call Vyasa's Mahabharata. Now there are three views, if you will, on the Mahabharata text, which I would like to take up one by one. One is that there was never a Mahabharata. It was a text that was made up from the beginning to the end. It's a text in sort of freely evolving, and different people added different things to it, and therefore we cannot speak of a Mahabharata. Then there are many who say that there are many Mahabharatas. So why should we pay attention to just the Sanskrit Mahabharata when there are so many, quote, vernaculars, i.e. the folklorists, the local performers, and as you saw, other Mahabharatas from, at least from Telugu, Malayalam, and Kerala. But of course, this is not the whole story. There is also a tradition in Maharashtra. There's a tradition in Kannada, for example. There is someone called Bala Vyasa or Kumara Vyasa who's going on creating and retelling the Mahabharata story. So this is the second view. One view is that there's no such a thing as Mahabharata. The other thing is there are many Mahabharatas. The third view, which I think makes sense for, which is scholarly, is that there was a Mahabharata. This was the Sanskrit Mahabharata, which gave rise to various versions. So let us look at these views one by one. First, let's take up the no Mahabharata hypothesis. The beginning of this view is found in the Mahabharata itself. First, the text itself says that Jaya was written, Jaya was made into Bharata, and then Bharata became Mahabharata. This view, unfortunately, is something I hear in conferences over and over, and somehow Indian scholars feel that this is because the text itself says that mentions Jaya, Bharata, and Mahabharata, somehow this is the tradition. But it is incorrect. This conception is part of the literary design of the epic itself. For example, in the Jaya, there is the unmitigated violence of war. Compare that to, that is the Rana. And then in the Bharata, the scene moves to Vaishampayana narrating the story to Janamejaya at the Sarpasatra, which is a sacrifice. And as you know, in sacrifice, violence is highly specific, regulated, and so on. And ultimately, what we call the Mahabharata is related by Ugrashtavas to Shaunaka in the Naimisha forest. So without these moves, Mahabharata could never say ahimsa paramo dharma because there is no ahimsa in war. There is exceptions for ahimsa and sacrifice, whereas only in the Naimisha forest, ahimsa is paramo dharma. So if you accept that first there was the Jaya, then it became the Bharata, then it became the Mahabharata, you're essentially discarding the dharma structure of the epic. You're paying a very high price just to appear somewhat intelligent. So these are not historical versions, but literary tropes. Then we look at the no Mahabharata. Oh, by the way, this conception leads to many confusions, even in the West. Western scholars like Wendy Doniger actually said that Mahabharata is like Wikipedia. Anybody could upload anything into it, and even if you didn't speak Sanskrit, you can pay someone to upload something. My challenge is, if you could upload something into the Mahabharata without destroying it, I challenge you to write a paragraph and see if you can fit it into the Mahabharata. It's not so easy as it seems. The whole idea is extremely ridiculous, but we'll move on. The second hypothesis is the no Mahabharata hypothesis. This means that there is no such thing. This is another version of the no Mahabharata hypothesis. This is, just to be clear, this is the no Mahabharata hypothesis. It has two forms. As I'm going to go over, there is an oral hypothesis that Mahabharata was originally just hero stories that were told by bards to warriors. So one scholar explained this to me as follows, that there would be battle and the charioteer would drive the king into battle. The king would want to hear about his glory sung, and the Mahabharata first started as these stories. The next is that, therefore, this is the Kshatriya hypothesis. Mahabharata was originally a hero story about Indo-Germanic warriors. So the German scholars became extremely interested in Mahabharata because, as you know, the Aryan racial theory begins before interest in language families and linguistics begins. Not a lot of people know this, but the linguistics is a subspecies of the racial science that is being created, race science that is being created in 19th century. And the word the German scholars chose for this race of Indo-European scholars, Indo-European poetry and connections, is Aryan. The third is the Brahmanic hypothesis. If Mahabharata was a story of heroes, how did it become a Dharma text? Answer: the Brahmins took over the Mahabharata hero epic and completely corrupted it. For example, there are passages where dakshina or gifts or payment is to be given to Brahmanas for their services. So, and Brahmanas should be respected. But you know, academics get paid. Professors, a tenured professor makes up to $200,000 a year, which is what Pollock or Wendy or Goldman make. And they're also respected and given a status in society, but that does not mean that they're just corruptors. So the Brahmanic hypothesis was made up because Germany felt that the Catholic Church had perverted Christianity, and in the same way, maybe the Brahmins have also perverted this hero epic. So the Brahmanic hypothesis is a kind of a Brahmanic corruption, is a kind of a story that is more, that belongs more to the history of Christianity than to the history of Hinduism. But we will leave it at there. At that, I've written a book on this with Joydeep. You're free to read it. The third is the inversion hypothesis. So if Krishna belonged to the Brahmanas and the epic was originally a war epic, which was only made in Gita was added, Narayaniya was added, Adi Parvan was added, then the original heroes must have been the Kauravas. And if you read German literature on the Mahabharata, which is my specialty, you see many scholars praising the Kauravas and holding them to be the true heroes of the epic. So all these four hypotheses, you see, work together to excise the philosophical, ethical, ritual, and theological content from the epic. All of these are disproved by manuscript evidence. Okay. This is the 19th century oral and well into the 20th century, oral hypothesis, Kshatriya hypothesis, Brahmanic hypothesis, inversion hypothesis. But it continues today. Now, today you cannot call you cannot even use the word Aryan in an American academy. So after the dreadful Holocaust in Europe, people stopped talking about Aryans. So lazy scholars did not critique the racial origins of this thesis, but instead began to focus on a bottom-up analysis of non-Sanskrit versions, saying the non-Sanskrit versions are more important than the Sanskrit one. So they deploy political arguments saying Brahmins are primarily a privileged class. Can you imagine academics saying Brahmins are privileged? I mean, I guess long before Trump, we had academics making up stuff. And Sanskrit is their code language. This means that somehow wherever there is any echo of Sanskrit, we need to look carefully and see privilege operate. Textually, we can continue the same historical narrative by pointing to versions of the story. So I hear so many papers about how Draupadi is treated in the Sanskrit Mahabharata and how she's treated in, let's say, a Tamil Mahabharata, and disrupting the textual tradition. The third is theological. Theologically, we can deconstruct Hinduism using this. Sorry, I jumped. Since classical Hinduism, while paying homage to the Vedas, is primarily based on Mahabharata, the fifth Veda. So if Mahabharata would not be there, Hinduism would not be there. Because the notion of ashramas, which are very small and have a small group of students, which are remote, versus the large population and rise of urbanization and so on, all these could not have sustained Vedic knowledge. Moreover, the Vedic knowledge is initiatory, and the Upanishads themselves are quite complex. For example, Shankara writes his commentaries in the 8th century approximately, and without those commentaries, you cannot understand the Upanishads. And much, much later, Sayana writes a commentary on the Vedas, without which, again, the Vedas would be inexplicable to us. Both Sayana and Shankaracharya are very well versed in the Mahabharata. So I just want to give you a view as to what is at stake and why there is so much pushback against Mahabharata, because it is the primary text of Hinduism. Then there are secular and Marxist ideologies which also deconstruct Hinduism. What is their logic? Nobody follows the Vedas. Hindus don't even know what the Vedas contain, and they certainly don't practice the Vedas. The Vedas nobody is reading hymns to Agni. Nobody is doing Agnihotra every day. So there is no such thing as Hinduism. There is no text for Hinduism. So Hinduism, as we talk about today, must be ideology. It must be just political ideology. So we must attack it however we can. And the third reason why contemporary Hindus agree is because of regional pride. So reject the hegemony of Sanskrit at all costs, please. Recognize regional languages. Telugu is so great, Tamil is so great, Marathi is so great, Bengali is so great, etc., etc. So a kind of regional emphasis pushes the Sanskrit Mahabharata to the back burner, but without it, these Mahabharatas will have no theological relevance either. The next one is the many Mahabharatas hypothesis, which is this, which says that there was a Mahabharata. This was sorry, the many Mahabharatas hypothesis that there is a Tamil, Marathi, Telugu Mahabharata. Therefore, we shouldn't even talk about Mahabharata in the singular. We should insist that there are many Mahabharatas and that we cannot say anything definitive about the Mahabharata. We can only specifically talk about either the Telugu Mahabharata or so. But this is ignorance. It arises from racial and evangelical ideas of othering, such as the Aryan hypothesis, which was originally interested in a Sanskrit Mahabharata because it gave them the Indo-Germanic connection. Now we are talking about vernacular Mahabharatas because talking about the Aryan thing is no longer fashionable. The second is it's implausible. As I showed you, Bhasa's Mahabharatas have nothing to do, or they have a lot to do with the Sanskrit Mahabharata, but you cannot say that Bhasa's Mahabharata is a standalone Mahabharata where we can forget the inspiration and the tradition, the textual tradition. So there are, as you saw, for 1800 years, this has been going on, the textual tradition, so which has been always paying homage to the Sanskrit Mahabharata. So to say there is no such a thing obscures the textual and religious history of Hinduism. It is akin to noting that there are different versions of the Bible, for example, Latin and German. For example, in the Latin Bible, you get saved by doing charitable works as well as faith in Jesus. But in the German version, you are saved by faith alone, that there is nothing beyond faith. And actually good work or charitable work is not counted towards salvation. This is a big difference. It's a big theological difference. So you say, oh, there are big theological differences. Look at the Book of Mormon. It just came up in the United States a couple of centuries ago. And before the Bible, there were some Gnostic gospels that were running around. And then you say, there's no such thing as a Bible. We can only talk about many Bibles. Now, would that make any sense? It does not. So whenever you hear the word many Mahabharatas, you have to understand that someone is speaking ignorantly and has imbibed certain prejudices that are pretty bad. It's also unscientific and illogical because all manuscript evidence shows there was a Sanskrit Mahabharata, which is the view I want to defend in this presentation, that there was a Mahabharata. This was the Sanskrit Mahabharata. It gave rise to various versions. We accept that there are interpolations, additions, like I told you, for example, the Subhadra episode, but these are neither random interpolations. They're carefully added in sections through colophons, and then the next in colophons, and the next scribe would copy them in. So this Sanskrit Mahabharata is a pan-Indic text, which has been carefully preserved in a Brahmanic custodial tradition. So now, by comparing these manuscripts, we can create a critical edition of the text, which is the ancestor of all the copies of the Mahabharata. So with that, we'll go into how we can define the text of this Mahabharata. What is its textual character? What is its literary architecture? And if we have time, go into meaning. So this is Vishnu Sitaram Suptankar. He was studying mathematics in Oxford. Then for some reason, because he comes from a Sanskrit background, he began to take a great interest in Mahabharata. He goes to Germany, learns the critical methods, and he sees that there are inconsistencies and prejudices in the application of this method. So he begins a massive project, which is funded by the Raja of Aundh. Usually they say Bori did it, Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, but that was only the physical location. As you see, Bhandarkar has produced nothing besides the Mahabharata edition, which is of any relevance. So the Raja of Aundh finances this project. A lot of Sanskrit Pandits come together and they collect all the available manuscripts of the Mahabharata, begin to collate them and show which text descended from which text. So at the bottom, I mean, I hate to throw terminology at you, but please be patient. These are called witness texts, which means these are manuscripts that are available to us. In many times, Sanskrit is transcribed into a local language. For example, look at this word here, Sharada. That is a script in which it is written. As you know, in Sanskrit, there is no S with a hyphen. These are English transliterations, or transcriptions. So the whole of Mahabharata would be transcribed into Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu, and so on. But the text would be the Sanskrit Mahabharata text. It would just be written in, if you will, the local script. So Suktankar collects them all and he starts grouping them. So he sees that the Sharada and Kashmiri share the same readings. Nepali, Maithili, and Bengali have small differences, which he will again put to create one ancestor text and put it together with Devanagari text and create this sub-recension, or another group called Gama, and Sigma for South Indian texts, Telugu and Grantha and Malayalam. So after he groups them, he begins to compare the groups again and come up with a northern recension and a southern recension. And by careful study of the comparisons between the northern and southern, especially paying attention to errors which were copied, significant errors which were copied, he arrives at something called the archetype, or the original Mahabharata. This work was taken up in 1927. It was completed in 1972. There were 11 editors, 4 general editors, and innumerable number of scholars, pundits who did the legwork. 18 major books, Parvans of the Mahabharata, is collected in these volumes, which are 19 volumes, and so on. Now, how much do you think the critical edition or the original Mahabharata had, or which is reconstructed, versus the interpolations? Some 75,000 verses have been preserved unchanged, and the other verses are the additions. So you see how, imagine using palm leaf manuscripts, and imagine this massive text preserved in Parvan. So each family would preserve a Parvan or so. Imagine preserving 75,000 verses, more or less unchanged, for more than 2,200 years. Especially in India, with the climate, the manuscripts fall apart very quickly. So the Mahabharata has played and organized Indian society in a pretty significant way. It's not just another book among books. Suktankar calls this the national spirit of India. These are three books that were written by Joy and myself. In the first book, which is called The Nay Science, we talk about the prejudices which bring up these issues on the Mahabharata, such as the Aryan epic and the notion of Brahmanic corruption. And it shows that logically that whole science of philology was not applied correctly to the Mahabharata scholars. Look, I already had a PhD in ancient Greek literature and philology. So when I came to Sanskrit philology, it was very clear that the German philology was subpar. It was very, very badly conducted. And those who couldn't get into classics had ended up in Sanskrit philology. So the scholarship was pretty bad. So that was what I addressed in that. In the unity of the Mahabharata, I took up the notion of upakhyanas and other Dharma teachings and showed that the upakhyanas are a part of the Mahabharata. So I didn't do it myself. I just have one work on the Amba Upakhyana. Joydeep, my student and colleague and co-author, wrote on Shakuntala, but other scholars wrote on different Upakhyanas. So this argues that we should read the Mahabharata as a whole. And in philology and criticism, there is a defense of Suktankar's critical edition, and it sort of is like a bhashya on the critical edition to make sure that the claims made by the critical edition are actually quite legitimate and logical. So this is, I'm going to wrap it up because I think I'm running way over time. How am I doing, Siddhi? Okay, so here you see how apparently there were, can you see the pointer at all?
Yes, Vishwaji, we can.
Yeah, so you see how from Northern Europe, Indo-Germans came, and with them either they brought it or these people composed it. There's an oral bardic epic. This is the oral hypothesis. They mixed with non-Aryan Pandavas. Pandavas were grafted into the whole Kaurava epic, which belonged to white Aryans. So basically you see Draupadi is called Kali, and you know, Duryodhana are supposed to be white, and he's called Pandu simply because he had anxiety about not being white. I mean, you read these works, you don't know whether you should laugh or cry or whatever. And that is how this very Aryan epic was corrupted by dark-skinned local people who were non-Aryan, and most of them were Brahmins, and they reversed the polarity of good and evil, and they made it. So this is the thing, and the task of the Germans was to, this is the arc of text, was to try to remove all Hindu interpolations, Dharma interpolations, Brahmanic interpolations, and arrive at this warrior epic. That's the goal of textual criticism, which is to restore the text to a point before it underwent contamination with local Indians. And this epic you usually see, therefore, to bolster this case, it's often compared to the Greek epics of war, such as the Iliad, to the Germanic epic, the Nibelungenlied. So all this is now disproved, and I will stop here. Any questions? So we can have a discussion now.
Vishwaji, this is Devang here. Just a question about your books. Can anybody read your books, or do we need some kind of like a preparation, or like, because I'm in terms of Mahabharata, I'm a layman. So let's say.
Okay, so I just want to point out that in the Mahabharata, what do you think guides all the discussions and the textual structure and so on? The answer to that would be Dharma. So Dharma is the ethical structure of Dharma will be moksha dharma for those who want to get out of samsara, and then it will be Dharma would be for those who are in samsara, how to have abhyudaya, how to avoid bad things and gain good things and so on. And literature, Raja Dharma, Kshatriya Dharma, Stri Dharma, Kula Dharma, all other branches of what we now call humanities are operating under the umbrella of Dharma in the Mahabharata. But when we come to the Western humanities, what is the umbrella under which they're all operating? What do you think? What is the basis of Western humanities?
Liberalism, and then like postmodernism.
So there are some ideologies, and
Yes.
then there are some vague notions of science that humanity should be like physics and chemistry, it should be scientific. And because they could not come up with a science, they came up with something called history, but that history was serving the function of this racial classification, which is, as you know, completely unethical. So
Right.
to study the Mahabharata is to dedicate oneself to a new form of humanities, which has Dharma as its big tent, if you will.
Okay.
So I urge you to begin studying the Mahabharata itself, read it. You can read these books, and I am part of the core faculty at Hindu University of America. My mission is to just help teach the Mahabharata and how to read it with these critical lenses, not just to critique the past, but also how to use the Mahabharata to create a new liberal arts, a new vision of humanities, which will not cross the ethical line. It will not take up issues like racism, othering, discrimination, but we invite all disciplines and all people to dialogue, that there is samvada. Look at Mahabharata, the whole thing is a dialogue. The
Right.
whole thing is a dialogue. Nothing occurs in the Mahabharata without a person saying it to a person saying it. Not one word.
Right. Well, I attended your last lecture in the orientation of Hindu studies. I'm a student, and after that, I did downloaded the Ganguly's interpretation of Mahabharata in English.
Translation.
Yeah, translation. I'm sorry, translation. Yeah, I did. But I'm going through, but like it's a very Mahabharata is a heavy text. Like for
Is
people.
it? Is it?
Like it's like difficult to, and I just like want to make one comment, not one comment, just one clarification. I went through a lot of your YouTube lectures, and when one of the lectures in New York, somewhere you were given, and you talk about the ancient Greek philosophy, and where you talk about the different types of government system by Plato, democracy,
Plato, yes,
democracy.
that is book 8
Yes.
of the Republic, Plato's Republic. Yeah.
Yes. So, and you for the first half of the video, you are giving a great emphasis on heroism, and then after 35 minutes of the video, you come and you talk about Mahabharata and how you relate both the ancient text of the Greeks to the concept of dharma and everything. So, I just wanted to know, where is heroism something equivalent to purusharth?
No, it is equivalent to dharma and artha. Dharma in the sense of swadharma, and it is also related to artha because that is your job, Arjuna's job.
Yes.
I mean, today we'll say for which he was paid, but in those days we don't say that. But his job was and his karma is also based on it. So a Kshatriya can marry and have a household and so on. So for all the three goals, for a Kshatriya, heroism is required. But notice that that Krishna gives advice to or teaches a lot of, he teaches Brahmanas like Uttanka, he teaches Kshatriyas like Arjuna, and Vyasa puts the Vyadha Gita, or the Gita of the butcher, in the mouth of a butcher in the Mahabharata. So it's a very egalitarian text. Its very purpose in its composition is to go beyond the Varna Dharma and make a book which is not throwing out Dharma, but make Dharma accessible to all people. That's why the Mahabharata is called Sri Shudra Veda. So today in humanities, we cannot privilege one section of wealthy people who can go to Ivy League schools and concentrate education in just that 0.1%, but we have to bring it to everybody. And Vyasa did that. Vyasa wrote a book which everybody can read and should read. And even if you don't read, he created a tradition, which I showed you, the Mahabharata tradition, where you can go see a play by Bhasa or so, or you can go see an art performance. For example, you can go see dance performances. Kathakali, for example, reenacts a lot of these things. You have festivals which recreate or remember certain things, such certain events, such as when Arjuna got the weapons from the Shami tree for Dashara, Vijayadashmi. And all over India, he also took in geography. So there are all these tirthas which are mapped onto India now. So you go anywhere in India, you say, oh, this is where Agastya went. This is where Vyasa's cave is, and so on. So in a way, he brings all disciplines into a new paradigm of humanities, which is the Mahabharata. So you should read the Mahabharata not just as an old text, but as a sort of a text which science fiction is now trying to catch up with, but it is way ahead into the future. Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so Vishwaji, Professor Adluri, my name is Ram. Just a quick comment, if you don't mind, sir. Very erudite talk.
Okay.
Just a comment, and very quickly. You mentioned what is the edifice of Western humanities, right? And as I read more and more, it is the savior complex. It is not the Dharma, the self-introspection, but rather the entire edifice is the savior. How can these people be saved? You see what I mean?
Which I don't think that it is a bad thing, because salvation is important. We need ultimate meaning and ultimate concern. But if you're saved only through faith, what would become the point of humanities anymore? That was my point. And I agree with your comment completely. Yes, there has been a salvation righteousness to the whole of Western humanities. And the very word liberal art means to liberate, but liberate what? Your soul. It does not it does not talk about ordinary human things.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Should I say something provocative?
Yes,
it's what sometimes I have 100 students in my class when I'm teaching, and it gets I have to play those things. So. Any other questions? Okay, great. So thank you very much. Hopefully you'll take courses at HUA. We will read the Mahabharata together. We'll do sections, close readings of the text. We will bring out philosophies. We'll see how the tradition had interpretations for different sections, not merely the Bhagavad Gita, not merely, I mean, Bhagavad Gita is a big deal, but other portions of the text as well, especially the Adi Parvan, is worth reading first and very carefully. It is very beautiful, it's very surreal, it's very poetic, it's very philosophical. Do I have 5 minutes, Siddhi ji?
Yes, Vishwaji.
Yeah, I wanted to show something to you, which
Okay.
So if we were to study the Mahabharata just as a literary document and not even be interested in its philosophy, it still is a very significant document. For example, so I will not download this, but I will share my my desktop, so you'll be able to see it pretty clearly. Share my desktop. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go into composition, I was talking about the 3 literary frames of the Jaya, Bharata, and Mahabharata. So you should know that the first Jaya is supposed to be the war narrative. So that is being told at by Vaishampayana at Janamajaya's sacrifice. Another image of Vaishampayana narrating. This is Vaishampayana narrating to Janamejaya, who's sitting here and performing the sacrifice. No, this is Janamejaya, sorry. This is Janamejaya and this is Vaishampayana. The story is going on here while the sacrifice is going on here. And then this is the Ugrasravas and Shaunaka sitting in the forest and listening. So here it is Rana, which is very violent. Here it is Yajna, which is somewhat violent. And here it is the peaceful Satra, where Ahimsa is Paramo Dharma. And if you just look at the structure of Mahabharata, as you can see here, the book begins at the end. So as you know, when you start reading the Mahabharata, the Ugrasravas has come to the forest and he's telling you what Janamejaya heard. And Janamejaya is Parikshit's son, Parikshit is Abhimanyu's son, Abhimanyu is Arjuna's son, and they're all dead. So he says Janamejaya asked about his ancestry, and then in the Adi Parvan, the whole story begins. And there is an Adi Vamshavatarana Parvan where all the gods like Indra and so on descend in their Amsha forms, and Krishna, Narayana descends as Krishna, and all the Asuras descend as Kauravas, and Adi Parvan begins like this. And then of the 18 books, exactly after 6, you get Bhishma Parvan, where Arjuna asks, how should I live in Pravritti? So karma yoga and bhakti are the answers given. And then exactly at in book 12, if there are 18 parvans, you can see 1, 6, and 12 are exact divisions in that. And here, Vyasa's son Shuka hears, learns, and he attains moksha. And he flies out of the text. He just goes into the sky and he just vanishes. And then the story is broken, and then Shaunaka returns, and the story continues through what happened after that. And in the Svargarohana Parva, all the actors go back up to heaven, and all those who played Duryodhana also go to a kind of a heaven that Yudhishthira sees, and it's like an action that is finished. But if you have not heard the Narayana Katha in book 18 and gotten moksha, you have to repeat the course and go another time. So those who are in samsara keep on going in this cycle. Those who attain moksha, either in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Narayaniya, develop a kind of shanti and vairagya, which allows them to dehiss from samsara cycle. So the text is composed like samsara is composed. So that's just so brilliant. And if you start reading the Mahabharata, this is Adi Parvan, first chapter, first adhyaya, first verse. The bard Ugrashravas, the son of Lomaharshana, singer of ancient stories. This is Itihasa Purana, not ancient lore. Once came to the Naimisha forest where rishis of strict vows were sitting together in the 12-year satra of the Kulapati Shaunaka. This is the first line. Then if you go to chapter 4, the same line repeats. The bard Ugrashrava, son of Lomaharshana, teller or singer of Itihasa Purana, came to where the rishis were gathered, etc. So why is this repeated? The answer is it begins at the end, and the cycle, this is the Greek word for this is Ouroboros, the snake grasping its tail. And where would you put things like list of content, summaries, and hermeneutic material, which form the nourishment of how to read the text? You split the beginning and you put these things in its mouth. So these two things, one is about the architecture of the Mahabharata and another is the double beginning of the Mahabharata, sort of should give you a clue to how intelligent this text is, and how every time you read it, your reading will be rewarded. This does not mean you should get very anxious about whether you're getting everything or not. You should just enter the text, and as you read it and live through it, the text itself will educate you. Okay. That's it.
I have to make one comment.
Any comments on the structure of Mahabharata? Yeah.
Jayaji wants to say something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jaya.
Now today is the Gita Jayanti, and it is really very good to learn about Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita. So thank you very much for this.
Oh, thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay. All right. So Siddhi, I'm gonna sign off. May I? Okay. See you all.
Thank you, everyone.
See you all at HUA. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.